In the heart of the American frontier, where dust rolled across endless plains and the horizon glowed gold at dusk, there stood a lonely ranch, a modest spread called 3 Times. Folks in those parts gave it that name because no matter the weather, the rancher who lived there rang a great iron bell exactly 3 times a day, dawn, noon, and dusk to travelers. The sound meant something deeper than time. It meant life. The man behind that bell was Elias Boone, a widowed rancher with eyes that had seen too much war and a heart that still refused to harden. He'd fought for the Union once, then for survival ever since. Every morning, Elias rose before the sun, stoked the fire, and said the same words his late wife used to whisper before breakfast: "The bell keeps the world honest." But honesty was a dying thing in those wild years. The frontier wasn't forgiving. It didn't care about right or wrong, only strength, and luck Elias had neither in abundance. Drought was tightening its noose around the valley, and the soil cracked like old leather. His cattle grew thinner by the week, and his water well was little more than mud and memory. Every few days he'd take his horse down to the riverbed that once cut through the plain, now a path of brittle stones. Folks told him to pack up and head east before starvation did the packing for him. But he stayed, not because of stubborn pride, but because of something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the bell, maybe it was faith. One scorching afternoon, while the sun baked the land to silence, Elias saw a cloud of dust moving from the south ridge. At first, he thought it was a mirage, but then through the shimmer he spotted them, a band of Apache riders, moving slow, weary, their horses gaunt. His first instinct was fear. He'd heard the stories, raids, fires, killings. He reached for his rifle, but didn't lift it. The riders stopped about 50 yards from his fence line. The leader, a tall man with a red band around his brow, raised an empty hand. Elias could see exhaustion painted across their faces, not war paint, but hunger and thirst. They were dying men. The old soldier in him recognized that look. For a long moment, nobody moved, just the wind, carrying the sound of the creaking windmill. Then Elias did something no man in his right mind would have done. He lowered the rifle and pointed toward the well. He called out, "Ain't much, but you're welcome to what's left." Apache leader watched him, suspicious, as if expecting a trick, but Elias meant it. He rang the bell once, a sign of peace. Slowly, the men dismounted and came forward. They drank, silently, gratefully. No words, just eyes meeting across centuries of mistrust. That night, Elias shared what little food he had, beans, bread, and the last of his smoked venison. They sat by the fire, and though they didn't share a language, they shared something older, the understanding of survival, the respect between men who had seen too much death before dawn. The Apaches left without a word. Elias figured he'd never see them again, but at noon, when he rang the bell, a distant echo answered. 3 short strikes somewhere from the ridge. The Apaches had understood from that day forward. Elias never felt alone when he rang the bell. Something unseen was listening, and maybe, just maybe, guarding him. What Elias Boone didn't know then was that this simple act, sharing water with his supposed enemies, would ripple across history like wind over prairie grass. It would start a chain of unlikely events that would rewrite the fate of a land at war with itself. Weeks passed, and whispers began to drift through the nearby town of Dry Creek. Travelers spoke of Apaches who no longer attacked wagon trains along the old trail, of strange new peace along the southern routes. Some claimed they'd seen riders marking stones with 3 circles, the sign of Elias Boone's ranch. When the U.S. cavalry heard about it, they sent a patrol to investigate. Captain James Avery rode up to 3 Times with 20 men, and suspicion heavy in his voice. He found Elias mending his fence, hands rough with work, and asked straight out, "You been harborin' savages?" Boone: "Elias didn't lie, I've been harborin' men, thirsty ones, same as any of us." Avery didn't know what to make of that. The frontier had a way of blurring lines between enemies. He left a warning: "One mistake, and you'll hang for treason." But Boone wasn't a man who bent easy. He kept ringing that bell, dawn, noon, dusk, and every time he'd hear faint echoes from beyond the hills, a silent pact between men who'd once faced each other down the barrel of a gun. Then one night, the horizon burned. A nearby ranch had been raided, not by Apaches, but by outlaws wearing stolen feathers to stir up hate. The townsfolk were furious. They saddled up for vengeance, ready to burn every native camp they could find. Elias knew the truth before anyone else. He'd seen the outlaws pass by 2 nights earlier. He could have stayed silent, saved himself the trouble, but that wasn't in his nature. He rode into Dry Creek, faced the mob, and shouted over their anger. "You're chasing the wrong devils." They didn't listen, so he rang his bell again, 3 times, loud enough to shake the silence of the valley. That sound became a signal, and before dawn, the real Apache band arrived, guided by their leader, Red Hawk. Together, Boone and Red Hawk ambushed the raiders near the creek side by side. White rancher and Apache warrior fought for the same soil, the same justice. When the smoke cleared, the truth stood naked before the whole town. Elias Boone had saved lives, not just his own kinds, but the very men they once called enemies. From that day, 3 times became more than a ranch. It became a meeting place. The first peace council between settlers and Apaches was held there under the shadow of Boone's bell. What began as a single act of mercy grew into a fragile peace that spread across the territory. Historians would later write that the Boone Accord delayed a war that might have drowned the frontier in blood, but Elias never sought fame or thanks. When asked why he did it, he said simply, "Because the bell don't know who's thirsty." Years later, when Elias Boone passed on, the Apaches came down from the hills to ring the bell one last time. 3 solemn strikes that echoed through the valley like a prayer, and even now, old-timers swear that if you ride through that land at sunset, you can still hear it. Faint, distant, calling across the ages, the sound of peace born from courage, reminding all who listen that history doesn't always change by war. Sometimes it changes by water and the will to share it. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories. Every week, we bring you the forgotten legends and true tales that shaped America's frontier, stories of courage, sacrifice, and the people who changed history in ways the textbooks never told. Hit that bell 3 times and join our growing community of storytellers who keep the spirit of the West alive.